Hello and welcome. Whenever I do an essay that involves Stan Lee, whether it's examining the details of early Marvel or his working relationship with an artist, there's always at least one comment stating I suggest Lee had very little creative involvement. Why don't I address that recurring comment right now? This way, when those comments arise, I can direct them to this video and clear up any misperceptions. Lee oversaw all of Marvel. He contributed ideas and collaborated with artists to refine those ideas into something that worked. His guidance and vision crafted Marvel into a powerhouse, influential publisher during the 60s and beyond. He was not simply a copywriter or a passive editor that accepted whatever an artist handed him. He was very active in shaping the creative direction of all Marvel titles, and just as important, the public perception of that company. Remove Lee from the formula, and Marvel would not have been a success. Full stop. As editor-in-charge, his instincts, his input, and his voice were an important element that contributed to Marvel thriving. In many ways, he's the epitome of an incredible editor. An editor is a middleman. They are in a position between the publisher, or editor-in-chief, if that position exists, and the talent pool. So they embody both the creative and the business portions of publishing. That's a difficult role, because it involves two disciplines that are forever at odds with one another. Creatives want to do work that connects with an audience. Publishers couldn't give a crap about artsy-fartsy intentions. They want sales, prestige, and nothing else. A good editor makes both sides of that equation happy. They foster talent and get the best work possible from them. Then they ensure the work they do get is marketable. It's a tough balancing act, and the massive success of Marvel in the 60s shows that Lee had a very solid record of walking that tightrope. Sometimes he was permissive, and sometimes he was strict. It depended on the talent he was working with. But again, that's a valuable instinctive skill that developed over many years. These are, in my opinion, indisputable facts. Hi, this is Alan, the voice of Strange Brain Parts. Sorry for the interruption, but I'll make this as brief as possible. Please subscribe and support this channel on Patreon. Links are down below. Thank you. Now back to the video. The problem, or the paradox that arises with Stan Lee, is everything about him is filtered through his public persona. Lee was effortlessly charming, well-spoken, and he connected with fans on a level that has rarely been accomplished by anyone else. He was the first true superstar of comics, and he was a champion of comics as a medium. That's another accomplishment worthy of recognition. Unfortunately, he was also a self-promotional huckster who used self-deprecation and humility to deflect questions. To be blunt, he rarely said anything of substance, at least in relation to specific details about the inner workings of Marvel. He would downplay or defer, answering hard questions with a joke or some other distraction. In one way, he didn't air dirty laundry, which is admirable. In another way, he avoided being genuine. Now, I'm not suggesting Lee was a bullshit artist. That implies he lied all the time, or that everything he said was suspect. That's inaccurate. However, I would characterize Lee as being really good at conversational sleight of hand. To give you an example of what that means, Lee would consistently lavish praise on the artists. He speaks with genuine admiration about the ability of the artists he worked with. He would talk about their skill, their efficiency, and how they could work with very little guidance. He gives them credit for being able to draw pictures that were expressive, bombastic, and exciting. Again, an admirable trait. But in the next breath, despite their immense talent and contributions, he wouldn't share any creative credit with them. That he reserved for himself as the one who came up with an idea. This is consistent with his opinion that whomever has the idea, whether it be for a story or a character, is the creator, which is a half-truth in a collaborative medium. Now, just to be clear, I'm not suggesting having an idea is not part of the creative process. I mean, of course it is. But to suggest the idea alone makes you the sole creator is a very simplistic or egotistical way of representing the collaborative process, especially in a medium where the visuals are at least half of the final product. Within this paradox, there's one more element that probably contributes to Lee's public persona. It's a bit of a deviation, but it pertains to the public image he presented. In 1968, with Marvel being sold to Cadence, the owner of Marvel, Martin Goodman, assured the company was legally solid. To this end, Lee signed a document stating all his work was the property of Marvel. For the record, around the same time, Jack Kirby and Joe Simon signed a similar document concerning Captain America, as did Bill Everett for Namor and Carl Burgos for the Human Torch. From this point forward, Lee remained formally under contract to whomever owned Marvel. That's the simplified version. There are a lot of finer details, but the point is, Lee was contractually Marvel's spokesman for many years. An important side note, I could not find a copy of the agreement between Lee and Marvel online, so the exact terms could not be confirmed. Therefore, the following is speculation, but it's reasonable speculation. End of side note. Logically, as Marvel's spokesman, Lee could not suggest or acknowledge others as creators of Marvel characters, especially after 1976 when US copyright was revised. Acknowledgement could lead to others challenging Marvel's ownership of their properties. I believe this revision was the opening that allowed Siegel and Schuster to sue DC for ownership of Superman in the late 1970s. So Marvel had to be concerned of legal challenges if Lee stated anyone other than himself had a role in creating characters. Therefore, by the explicit or implied terms of his contract, Lee had to publicly assume credit for all his Marvel work. Doing so affirmed the waiving of rights he did in 1968. In other words, every time he stated he created a character, he was also saying Marvel owned that character. Again, his public statements may have been bolstered by ego and his belief that he was the sole creator. Or for that matter, he truly believed that Marvel owned everything, despite the contributions of others. Regardless, Lee was under contract and getting a salary from Marvel for decades, so it's unlikely he'd say anything on the record that would jeopardize his income. That's just practical. If there's anything to be gleaned from this editorial, it's that Lee, like any individual, was composed of nuance. I mean, life in general is nuanced. Absolutes are for those who are intellectually lazy, or have an agenda, sometimes both. It's easy to acknowledge Lee's accomplishments, while also presenting a narrative that contradicts his version of events. Exploring that contradiction, or giving it equal weight, doesn't diminish Lee's achievements and contributions. It's not a binary either-or option. Both can exist simultaneously, and they do. Exploring contradictions to Lee's narrative does not mean he didn't contribute to the success of Marvel. He did. He most certainly did. Nor does it mean he didn't have a creative impulse. Again, he did. His editorial input, the stories he plotted and scripted, and the direction he maintained for Marvel during the 60s was quite an achievement. Recognizing that others had a part of that achievement is simply a fair, grounded perspective. He couldn't have done it alone and had the same result. Conversely, remove Lee from that formula while keeping all the other creative talent, and it's very likely Marvel would not have succeeded. Thank you for watching. Thanks to all my fine supporters on Patreon and YouTube. Your ongoing support makes it possible for this channel to continue. I appreciate every single one of you. Please subscribe if you've not already. Leave a comment and a like. I try to keep ads and self-promotional bits like this to a minimum, so if you can, consider directly supporting this channel on Patreon. Extra special thanks to Green Man, Constant Disappointment Records, Jeff Nicholson, Sicken, Francis De La Cruz, Russell Bull, John Nyukes, Andrew Barton, Odin Ashcroft, Ruby St. Dennis, Phil Sagan, Edward Clayton Andrew, Corey Drew, Brian Deaton, Tom Granis, John Gaunt, James Graham, and Matt Marino. You are all justified and ancient.